Hi, this is Dr. Giobbi. We turn now to Gestalt therapy. Gestalt therapy is probably the techniques in Gestalt therapy is the one that I've used the most when I was working as a therapist with adults and also with adolescents. Um, to me, Gestalt therapy is just an extremely powerful and right-minded approach to psychotherapy and counseling, and it's really a way of life. Gestalt theory. I see elements of Jungian psychology in Gestalt. I see elements of Wilhelm Reich in his approach to psychotherapy. I see elements of Buddhism and Taoism, Eastern approaches to psychology. There's certainly an element of psychoanalysis here, psychodynamic theory. The founder of Gestalt psychology is someone that usually elicits a response of either admiration or repulsion. Fritz Perls, Francis Perls. Uh, he was a German Jew who seemed to alienate people wherever he went. He jumped around from country to country, finally settling in the United States, and mostly in California. He really found his niche in the 1950s, 60s counterculture of California. Uh, he It was just a force. He was a force. I guess this Dr. Seuss quote here, be who you are and say what you feel because those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. I think that really does give you a feel for Fritz Perls. Fritz Perls was a student of Wilhelm Reich, and you may not have heard of Wilhelm Reich, but he's certainly worthwhile studying. Reich. Reich came up with an idea called body armoring, and he felt that all of our personality proceeds from physical tensions in our bodies that we develop growing up. We firstly have body armor, and that body armor, where we hold our tensions in our body to protect ourselves, becomes character armor. So our character always has a correspondence with, or correlation with, a correspondence with our body language. And we all have different mannerisms and areas of our body where we hold tensions. And what Reich found was that bringing attention to these physical areas of our body, that maybe the person who's has depression and anxiety bearing the weight of the world on tight shoulders, or the cerebral person with all their energies focused in their head, to their forehead, their cerebrum, or maybe the person who's over sexualized, focusing the female focusing their energy on their breasts and their behind. It's like a psychological. You can look and read people as you're walking down the street where they're holding their energies and get a good sense of their personalities from this. So that's Wilhelm Reich, and Fritz Perls was a student of Reich's, and I see a lot of similarities between Reich and Perls. I also see that, and Wilhelm Reich, of course, was also a big figure of the counterculture. He died in 1957. I guess what I'm trying to tell you here is I see Perls as a great popularizer of the concepts that existed from his teachers. Wilhelm Reich being one of them. He was trained Freudian psychoanalyst, so definitely Freud is one of these, but he kind of brought this into the 1950s and 60s counterculture of California. And he was a main figure amongst other radical kind of hippie psychotherapists at Salon, which is in the Big Sur in California. It's a institute where people would go to find out who they are. So we have Fritz Perls, a dynamic character. Here's the Gestalt prayer that Fritz Perls wrote, and he would have all his patients learn this prayer. I do my thing, you do your thing. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. And you are you, and I am I. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it cannot be helped. So we really have this picture of Perls, and what he's telling us is that a lot of our problems come from putting expectations on other people when it's none of our business to be doing that. That we have to grow up and hold ourselves responsible for our circumstances and stop playing the blame game. I am I and you are you. I owe you no explanations, you owe me no explanations. If we meet, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. And according to Perls, the moment that we start trying to change each other, control each other, well, you should do this and you should do that. That's the top dog, the should. Once we start putting this on other people or putting on ourselves, then that's the end of our relationship with that person. You simply allow the other person to be, trust in their way of being, and if two people no longer have a meeting, then they go their separate ways, and there's no blame to the other person. The part of Gestalt therapy is, well, I think one of the reasons I was drawn to it was I in psychology, my personal interests never were very much involved in illness, psychological illness. I was never too interested in, diagnosis and curing people's problems, their depression and their anxiety. My interest in psychology has always been self-exploration, to get to know oneself better. That's why psychoanalysis was so appealing to me, and I think that's why Gestalt psychology is so appealing to me, because the part of Gestalt psychology is getting to know yourself. As your book says, Gestalt therapy helps individuals know themselves, their strengths and self-sufficiency. And according to Gestalt theory, the most important areas of concern are the thoughts and feelings people are experiencing at the moment. So this is not a problem focused. It's not an illness focused therapy. Gestalt therapists usually aren't so interested in curing anxiety or curing depression. Like psychoanalysts, they're interested in introducing the person to themselves, helping that person to become aware of where they're distracting themselves from the future, distracting themselves with the past, and avoiding the present. It's very here and now. This is part of Zen, part of the Buddhist influence on Gestalt therapy. For Perls, when the phenomenon of constantly thinking about the future, trying to control what hasn't happened yet, is the core root of anxiety. So when an individual who we get to know, a child or an adult, when we get to know through talking with them, through bringing their attention that they're focused on the future, that focus and redirect them to the present, to the here and now. This is really a way of having the individual focus on the now and trust that tomorrow the future takes care of itself when you focus on the now, and suddenly anxiety dissipates. But this isn't just a cure for anxiety. This is a way of understanding how addiction to worry about the future and trying to control the future is a defining aspect of our personalities. Therefore, ways of being in the world, what we manifest as symptoms, are a complete result of our personality structure, our approach to living. There's no talk here about neurotransmitters and genetic disorders. This is all responsibility of the individual to work with what they have and to become aware of themselves. Likewise, the individual who's always dwelling in the past, sacrificing being present at this very moment, always thinking about something that happened in the past, either nostalgically, like, oh, I wish I could be back in the past, or with great sorrow because something happened or they did something in the past that they can't change. That's what we call depression. Depression is a dwelling on things that we have been involved with that we can't change, whether they happen to us or we did them to someone else or to ourselves, whatever that is. It's not being in the present. And for Gestalt therapy, it's about distraction from being in the present moment. So what's the big deal about the present moment? Why is the present moment so threatening? Well, I think Pearls is very similar here to Erich Fromm, who wrote the book Escape from Freedom. Escape from freedom, escape from the present moment. When we are in the present moment, we're across from another person. It can be highly intense and threatening to make authentic contact with that other person. It can be very threatening and difficult to make authentic contact with ourselves. So we distract ourselves from what we're feeling. We distract ourselves. We escape from being present with another person by what? Let's go to do this. Let's go to do that. What do you think of this? Let's get distracted by what's on the news. Or distracted by, let's play the woe is me game by getting distracted by the past and depression or the future anxiety. Let's worry about something that hasn't happened yet. These are all escapes from the intensity of authenticity. Now, Pearls describe people who lived inauthentically as phonies. He had a very, very good grasp on the lexicon on English and the everyday language. And so he referred to people who weren't being authentic as phonies. And he would, when someone was saying something where, say, they were saying how sad they were, but yet there was a smile on their face, he'd bring this to their attention. When there was an incongruency between what the body was saying and what the person's words were saying, or when the person was contradicting themselves, he'd bring this to their attention. He'd say, "You're being a phony. I don't believe you. You're not as angry as you're claiming to be." This therapy requires a cultivation and development of a great sensitivity in yourself, to yourself and your reactions to others, and also a great sensitivity to others, their body language. As Freud said, it's not so important what people are saying. What's important is how people are saying it. And for Gestalt psychology, the big issue is how someone is saying something, what they're saying, how they're saying it, compared to what the body is saying. Someone talking about a person and while their hand is clenched, their brother or something, or touching their chest up by their throat, the vulnerable area when they speak of their mother or their father. These are all physical languages that can either be congruent or incongruent with what the person is saying. So we have a very, very powerful form of counseling here in Gestalt therapy. And I would say that beyond, we call it therapy, but I think this is a lifestyle. I think people who adopt the Gestalt approach integrate it into their own life. I was fortunate enough to study with two Gestalt therapists. Both had their own unique interpretation of Gestalt therapy, and it greatly influenced my life. To this day, I use some of these techniques on a weekly basis. If I'm working through something, I use the Gestalt dream analysis technique, which is very powerful. This has just been, in our textbook, this is the single most important therapeutic approach that I have had in my life. So there are biographies on Fritz Perls, a very, very controversial figure. There's on YouTube many videos of him doing. He focused in the end mostly on group counseling, encounter groups type things. I don't think this is. I think people make a bigger deal out of this word Gestalt and the translation than is actually true. It says a German term that cannot be translated exactly into English. I think Gestalt is the organization. Gestalt is organization. You have a group of pieces of information. You might want to call those, well, we have information. And you organize that information in different ways and you come up with different systems, different facts. The same information can be interpreted in many different ways. That's what I think Gestalt is. Gestalt is an ordering into a certain organization, an organon, an organization into a meaningful whole. Now, it's not so difficult to get. If you watch a movie and you watch the film, and instead of watching the whole film, you just freeze a frame and study that one frame, that would be kind of like looking at a neurochemical or a neuron. The frame isn't the whole story. It's just one frame. And in much of psychiatry and medical psychology today, medicalized psychology, we treat looking at a close-up look as something that's more powerful than looking at the whole. And for Gestalt, you want to look at the whole story. It's a holistic approach. So this concept comes from Wilhelm Reich. Instead of talking about Gestalt, Reich talked about the organon. And what is organon? It's the Latin root of the word organization, how something is structured. So you want to look at how the person structures reality. They have here a form, a configuration, a totality. Yes, so in other words, when you are watching a film, you sit down and you watch the film from beginning to end. You don't study one frame and analyze it to get to know the film. You watch the whole film and experience it. When you read a book, you have to read the book. You don't take a certain page and narrow it down closer and closer, one paragraph, one word, one letter, one space between the letter, like is done in neuroscience. You look at the whole book. You read the story and you get to know it. So this is the word Gestalt. The only other thing I'd like to really bring to your attention is Gestalt therapy of Fritz Perls has nothing to do with Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kafka, Wolfgang Kohler, and the Gestalt research psychologists. This is a separate thing. They were 40 years before Fritz Perls, and the only thing they have in common is their use of the word Gestalt. There's no connection between Gestalt psychotherapy and Gestalt research psychology. Well, when we look at the Gestalt assumptions about human beings, the focus is firstly on not the future, not the past. It's on the now, the here and now. You can find these themes at the same time in history through all the Zen writers that are becoming popular in California: Alan Watts, D.T. Suzuki, Chogyam Trungpa, all of these Buddhists, these Buddhist Taoist Buddhist psychologists are focusing on the now, on the here and now. I'm going to illustrate this by challenging you to take a walk with a friend. Go into the woods, take a walk with a friend, and have no verbal discussion. No talking to each other. The only thing that you can do is when you see something that strikes you, that you want, that interests you, point to it to bring the attention to your friend. and let them do the same. Now, what you find is, in the beginning, it's a bit phony, and it's difficult not to talk, to just remain present in the moment. We distract ourselves with talking. Talking starts to be a gossip, starts to be about the future, what we're going to do. It's going to be about what happened yesterday or how last night was, instead of remaining fully present in the authentic moment, the now. And by not talking, you you only point out what you're experiencing right now to share with the other person. What's the phony aspect of this? When you're pointing at stuff that really doesn't make any difference to you just for the sake, because that's what the exercise rules are. That's phony. Authenticity, or not being phony, is when you walk and maybe you don't even point to anything except something that one thing captures your attention that you think is worth sharing. Then that's authentic. The phony baloney is when you're living up to some should. The top dog, as Pearls calls it. And the top dog can be the attitudes and expectations of other people or society that, like the superego, gets put on to internalized, and we become the should. The underdog is the want. Maybe that's like the id, I would say, desire. And becoming aware of shoulds and wants in us, top dog and underdog attitudes. It's part of what Freud called ambivalence, love-hate. We don't have clear, straightforward relationships to things, to dichotomies. We are complicated dichotomies. One day, one end of a dichotomy appeals to us, and a little later in the day, depending on the Gestalt, on the circumstances that we're facing, the opposite end appeals to us. We're very seldom one way or the other. We live in complicated dichotomies, and part of understanding human nature, and from a Gestalt point of view, is to embrace that we are complex beings. As Walt Whitman says, do I contradict myself? Therefore, I contradict myself. I am a multitude. I'm big. I'm large. In other words, people constrict themselves and live phony lives by sticking too closely to some self-image that they promote, when in fact we're really complicated. And there are times when we think something is positive, and a few minutes later we could think that very thing is negative. We're complicated beings that exist in constant flux of dichotomies. So normal, healthy behavior occurs when people act and react as total organisms. So when you approach life and you approach anything, instead of looking at something and thinking, I don't like that, think of it in terms of a complex interaction that has some things you actually do like, and under certain circumstances you would like. What comes to my mind? I think about this regarding law enforcement. There are many times, majority of the time, I really want to have access to a police officer if I need it. If I'm being victimized in a crime or something like this, boy, I want to be able to rely on the police. However, there's also a lot of times where I see police and I get nervous that I'm going to be victimized by the police. I mean by being pulled over and given a ticket for some little minor thing, or based on that person's insecurities or whatever insufficiencies they have as bad apples, perhaps one bad apple, being victimized because they don't like the way I look or the car I drive or something like this, style of my hair. Anything can be seen. So this is an ambivalent relationship towards police officers. And I want them to be there when I need them. I want them to be honest and help me to have justice and protect me. And I'm also very wary of the potential abuse of power that comes along with someone in a uniform and a firearm and a badge. So this is an example of very complex situation not being boiled down to a sign in your front yard, I support the police, or watch out for authoritarianism. These are extreme outlooks. You can't. It's more complex. You can't completely trust the police, and put all your support in them no matter what. That's not the way life is. That's not the way the facts pan out. And also, you can't look at them as if they're all bad guys. I remember in some of the protests in New York that I witnessed in the 1990s and early 2000s, where it was on a banner, all thugs wear flag pins. And I understand the rhetoric of this. I completely understand what's being discussed here about the abuse of authoritarian, malignant nationalism, and this is the dark side of patriotism. However, it's not all or nothing. This is a very simplistic view of things and painting too broad of a brush. Of course, I can look later and see these glorious, incredible individuals who 70 years ago stormed the beaches in Normandy, and their wearing a flag pin certainly has nothing to do with being a thug. So the thing to really become sensitive to is things are not so simplistic as to be able to boil it down to one yes or no situation. It's a complex fluctuation of dichotomies. This is part of human nature. And many people fragment their lives, disturbing concentration and attention among several things at one time. So this is again about being in the now. Instead of being present and focusing on one thing at a time and becoming authentic with that one thing, we tend to escape the intensity of authentic encounter by distracting ourselves. Ideal example of this today is watching a people sitting around a table all on smartphones, each of them isolated from one another, avoiding any intimate contact with each other. The view of human nature is positive. I don't know what that means. I don't really think that that's... I struggle with this comment because I'm not so sure Fritz Perls would have believed this as well. I think people, by human nature, are driven by self-deception and avoidance of responsibility. If we are to say, Fritz Perls himself described in his writings that the Gestalt approach to psychotherapy is all about growing up. It's taking responsibility for oneself and stop playing the blame game. Oh, crybaby blame game. If only society would change, my life would be better. If only my boss wouldn't act this way. That's all immature adolescent behavior. And for the Gestalt therapist, you take responsibility. If you don't like, if you feel you have a problem that your boss is holding you back, then do something about it. You're not a victim unless you stay in the situation. Even with social issues, rise above it. Do something to counter it. I'm not so sure I agree with this idea of view of human nature as positive, but I'll hold off. I think that human nature can be viewed as positive, but I think there's also a lot of self-deception going on in the human condition that Gestalt psychology seeks to unveil, to bring to the attention of the individual. People are capable of becoming self-regulating beings who can achieve a sense of unity and integration in their life. So we could view that as a positive thing, that people can become aware of themselves and learn to, here's the word, self-regulate. This is a word you'll have heard me use in previous lectures. And self-regulation is one of the greatest things that Gestalt psychology teaches us. And it's also one of the things that we can teach our children, how to self-regulate, how to satisfy our own needs rather than creating demands on other people to satisfy our needs. Growing up, in other words. This is Pearl's language called growing up. By the way, Pearl's used very colorful language. When we were not being honest with ourselves, when we were self-deception, like the defense mechanisms, Pearl's referred to this as bullshitting ourselves. And he would often say in his therapy sessions, when someone started feeding some kind of self-deception to him as a therapist, Pearls would say, yes, now you're bullshitting me. Or he'd say, you might like to bullshit yourself, but you won't bullshit me. And this is Pearls was always staying on the person, challenging their self-deceptions. Lose your mind and come to your senses. What is this all about? Well, losing your mind means get out of fantasizing about the future. In other words, worrying about how you're going to control what's going to happen and how successful you're going to be and will I, can I, all that's anxiety. Get out of that. Get out of your head about the past and things you can't undo. Stuff happened, and get into the now. What's the now? It's what you see, it's what you smell, it's what you taste, it's what you hear, it's what you feel on your skin, and it's what you are aware of inside of you, your internal emotional state. Now this is coming to your senses. The 5 external physical senses and the 6th internal introspective sense. Lose your mind and come to your senses. This is not a Pearl's invention. This is Alan Watts and all the others of this Zen Taoist culture. My mind is slipping of an author of this period that is so powerful about losing your mind and coming to your senses. An Indian writer, which will come to me. But Alan Watts is a good example if you check out the work of Alan Watts. Lose your mind and come to your senses. Awareness alone can be curative, so the very act of becoming aware, being mindful, is Krishnamurti, that's his name, Krishnamurti. He was lose your mind, all these concepts. Awareness alone can be curative. So just becoming aware, becoming mindful, cures symptoms. With full awareness, self-regulation develops and total person takes control. The best thing we can do for our children and to other people and for ourselves is to become aware and to learn how to self-regulate, how to solve our own problems and not put the burden or expect other people to save us. Before we move on, I want to switch the focus to a little bit more of child Gestalt therapy. And this book by Violet Oaklander, Windows to Our Children. This book is just fantastic. It was written in the 1970s. It's going to be a different kind of read for you than the contemporary, mass-published textbook read. This is a very personal book on Gestalt exercises for children. You'll understand what the exercises are. So this is a book to take a look at. I would say make this part of your library. So what does healthy functioning look like for Gestalt point of view? Well, it's valuing the here and now in order to experience each minute fully, being present. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh and all the other mindfulness meditation teachers call mindfulness. This comes from Buddhist psychology. Embracing self-awareness and experience and understanding and accepting all parts of the self. This is integrating the opposites. This is very much, again, Hinduism, Buddhism. Jungian psychoanalytic theory is all about experiencing opposites. For Jung, there's parts of ourselves that we don't want to know about, the shadow. And instead of seeing these as bad things, Jung says, get to know your shadow, make artwork, do active imagination. The process of that Jung proposed for encountering the shadow, the unconscious of ourselves through images and symbols and moods and emotions that we find in dreams or in fantasy. And this all plays into getting to know it. You integrate it into your larger sense of self. You don't reject it. You don't say, oh, I hate myself because this is bad because I'm lustful for this or that or gluttonous. Instead, you make friends with it and learn from it. Say, this is part of my personality. This is who I am. I don't have to do it. I can self-regulate and not engage in these things, but the desire for it is part of who I am. This is a more Jungian integration, but Gestalt therapy does the same thing. You become aware of it, and then you integrate it into the whole. Instead of rejecting it, it becomes part of the complex tapestry of who we are. This is awareness. This is a restructuring of how we view ourselves, and it's also a reorientation towards self-regulation in our relationship to those sides of ourselves. Instead of hiding them from ourselves and doing all kind of neurotic things to not encounter them, we encounter them directly, become aware of them, and become okay with it. Prizing wholeness or responsibility and understanding life is a process. As people mature, they move past old ways and become more self-sufficient, self-observing, and self-understanding. If we look around at our contemporary culture today, we see undeniably an adolescent way of being, adults, very self-serve, me, crybaby stuff, as Pearls would say. Drive down the road, get out of my way, tailgating, get out of my way. No respect for other people's rights to be there. Me first. This is a very immature way of being. It's an adolescent way of being. Part of Gestalt is growing up, taking responsibility for oneself and for the world we live in. So Pearls would say that right now we're living in an extremely, we're living in an American culture in a situation where people are very, very much adolescents, the United States of adolescence, all about attention seeking and wanting to be admired, all this stuff. And through Gestalt, you learn to grow up and be aware of these desires and self-regulate and be responsible from distracting yourself for these neurotic needs. People cause themselves problems by not handling their lives in this way, lacking contact with their environment, so not being present, distracting themselves so they're not fully present in their environment with others. Confluence, this is incorporate themselves into others or the environment into themselves. So confluence is when an individual loses themselves in something else. Prime example is patriotism, taken to its extreme nationalism. Now this doesn't mean having civic duty and maybe being acknowledging that you're a part of a society, an American or Frenchman or Chinese, a citizen of China. But confluence is when one mixes themselves up with the kind of incestuous patriotism, the motherland, the fatherland. When you start seeing people drive around with the flags flying off the back of their trucks and all this nationalistic, our country is the best, and this kind of, the person has confluenced. They're confusing, they've lost their own personal identity, and it's become kind of like dissolved into something other than themselves. This also happens with sports teams, the ultras, ultra fans, fanatics. Fans is short for fanatics. It's a fanaticism. Happens, the person loses themselves in identification with a sports team or with I don't know what kind of automobile or anything. You can become this. It's an inauthentic way of living. It's phony. Confluence. The person has lost touch with themselves as an individual and has become subsumed and dissolved into some greater thing. Greater meaning other than themselves, outside of themselves, a mob. Unfinished business. Unfinished business is when There's stuff from the past that remains open, that needs conclusion. This is not dwelling in the past. This is the present. In other words, the thing happened in the past, but the need to finish that business is something in the present. And there are different techniques you can do. If you have something, or the child, your client has something that is haunting them from the past, there are techniques in Gestalt therapy to come to terms and to conclude, to resolve those conflicts, to finish the business, unfinished business. So what are some of the causes of problems for Gestalt psychologists? Fragmentation. Inability to find what one needs caused fragmentation. This is when one is focusing on a word or a letter instead of the whole book, one paragraph instead of the whole book. Fragmentation is when we don't focus on the whole, we don't see the big picture. We're caught up in a little tiny aspect of something that's dominating our whole attention. Top dog, underdog split. This is, we described before, the should and the want. The top dog says should. The underdog part of it says want. And this is a constant conflict that we encounter in our daily lives that causes problems that we have to address. And polarities. The need to resolve conflicts between existing polarities. I described that earlier with the police officer example. You can see this in many things of life. Gestalt therapy takes self-exploration. So looking at these polarities, we have 5 types of polarities. There's physical polarities. So this is the nervous system, the anxieties, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, the calming down nervous system, how it works in fluctuation based on certain situations. Physical, the physical polarities of male and female. This says masculine and feminine, but this would be more physical aspects of masculinity and femininity. Emotional, so pleasure and pain dichotomies, love-hate dichotomies, it's we call ambivalence. Excitement and depression. Mental, so parent-child, feeling and reason. Top dog, underdog. Mental means thoughts, cognitions, as we'd say in cognitive psychology. Spiritual, so intellectualism versus dogmatism, so belief. This is something that's central to Jungian psychology. In Jungian psychology, and in existential psychology, it's all about purposefulness and meaning in life and the value of believing in things that are unlikely to be real. But there's a function in belief that seems to be essential for the human condition. And I'm not narrowly stating this as religious belief. Some sort of belief in some bigger thing than ourselves. Not necessarily God. This could be art. This could be it could be environment, the world, the ocean, the ground, whatever. But there's a spiritual aspect. Often we define spiritual too narrowly as being religious oriented, but religion is the obvious aspect of spirituality, but any of those of you here who are a painter or an artist or a poet knows that the spiritual exists in those things. And inter-individual, so how we identify ourselves. Oh, this is a very good slide right here. Theory of counseling. This is how you address things in the counseling. The first is the phony layer, trying to be what people are not. When you're a Gestalt therapist, you put a lot of work, and you constantly bring to the attention to the individual when they're being a phony, when they're trying to be someone they're not. I like to call this affected. Do you want to see phony, affected people? Look on all the videos that people are posting of themselves. Like me, like me, like me. TikTok and Facebook Reels, that stuff. This is all phony, trying to be what they are not. Even if what they are presenting is who they are, they're being phonies simply because they are neurotically addicted to look at me, look at me, look at me. And so you bring this to their attention. We have an epidemic in child and adolescent counseling for the phony layer of look at me, look at me, look at me. Don't you envy me? Phobic layer. So this is the first thing that you start. It's as you're going to see from the examples that I post from Fritz Perls doing therapy. This is a very abrasive therapeutic approach. You call people out on their phoniness, trying to be what they are not. Phobic layer, aware that the fears. So after you start being people aware of their phoniness. The phobic layer is aware of the fears that force the phony game. So you start to say, what is the individual who is incessantly posting videos of themselves to be liked and to be admired and to be seen as a sex symbol or a model or a weight training physique champion? What is the game being played here? What are the fears? What's the phobic fear that contributes to the person that being a phony is satisfying? The phony game. So you start to investigate that with the client. Then you get to what's called an impasse layer. An impasse is something you can't get past. And this is usually where most therapy sessions end because the person bails. Shed environmental supports of their game without a better way to cope with fears and dislikes. So this is when you really get the client to take responsibility for their whatever these phony fears are. These fears that are the impetus to them being a phony, seeking attention, like me, help me, and this is where you shed all those things and really take responsibility for yourself and come to terms with these fears without seeking attention support or external support, as it's saying here. So in other words, self-regulating, being able to satisfy these needs in yourself, for yourself, without making a spectacle of yourself. This is the impasse layer because it's very difficult to get past this layer. The implosive layer, if you progress into this, aware of how they limit themselves and begin to experiment with new behaviors. This is where you see Gestalt experiments. It's experimenting with new ways of self-regulating that don't involve being a phony. And the explosive layer, discover unused energies tied up in maintaining the phony existence. When one frees themselves of this neurotic need to be to have attention and to be seen in a certain way and to be liked and like me, and if you don't like me, you must be jealous, and I am who I am if you don't like me or not. This is all phony business. If you at this point, if you don't care what people think, you don't even talk about it. The very fact of having to tell people that you don't care what they think means you're wrapped up in a phony business, inauthenticity. So discover, once you're freed of this burden of even telling people you don't care what they think, you have all kind of life energy freed up to actually enjoy life, the here and now, and get off the neurotic need for like me, aren't I special? So you can feel that this raises the ire of people. And this is part of the point of Gestalt, is to raise the ire of the individual, to bring them into contact with themselves. It might be the first time in life that anybody does this, brings to their attention this adapted way of being they've come to adopt in their lives. So here are some other concepts we've been talking about. Body language. Project thoughts onto empty chair as a significant person. These are really two different concepts here. Body language is becoming aware of what one is doing, communicating with their body. If they're holding tensions in their fist while they're talking, bringing that to the attention of the client, saying, are you aware of what's happening in your left hand? What's happening there? And they look down and they see they're clenching their fist. And then you say, if your fist, what's your fist saying? What's it saying? And they'll resist this. My fist isn't saying anything. But like you get past this this impasse of, my fist can't talk, and say, well, pretend it can talk. If it could talk, what's it saying? And then hearing, my fist is saying it's tense, it's angry, and listening and imagining then what's the voice? Whose voice is that? They might even discover that it's someone in their life. So this is becoming aware of what the body is saying, and this takes great work of the therapist to constantly bring into the attention and be aware and observe the client and bring their attention what their body is saying at different times, and saying, when you talk about your brother, you're clenching your fist. Can you put those two pieces of information together? And now the empty chair is a technique that's very powerful that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Let's hold off on the empty chair for the moment. Direct experience of the here and now, integration and maturation, Gestalt's new needs. So we've discussed this previously about this is becoming present in the moment. Help people help themselves to grow up. That means stop expecting people to take responsibility for them, and now this of course is more for adolescents and adults. Little children, they are children. They can't expect them to be adults, they have to be children. Integration is creating whole person whose behavior matches their inner state, so there's no incongruence. There's congruence between what the person's body is saying, how they're saying something, and what they're saying. It's an agreement, and that's a sign of authenticity. People should grow in awareness, take responsibility for their actions, move from environmental support to self-support. In other words, grow up. Don't expect environmental support. Don't expect others to carry the weight. You carry your own weight. I remember one of my Gestalt training therapists would stop when the person would stop doing work, and the therapist was doing all the heavy lifting. They'd say, "This isn't Matthew row the boat ashore. This is Matthew and Carl row the boat ashore." So it was bringing to the client's attention that they stopped working and they're being lazy, and that they too have to participate in being self-supportive. And eventually the therapist helps the person become aware of this, paddles the boat with them for a while, and then eventually they have to grow up and take care of themselves. Now, talking about counseling methods, change in language. Gestalt therapist is always making an individual own what they're saying. So when the patient says, "You know how it is," the therapist says, "Can you rephrase that using I instead of you?" You say, "I know how it is." And then, so you're not the client's not displacing responsibility for things onto another person. You know how it is. No, I don't know how it is. How is it? Repeat, I know how it is. And they say, I know how it is. And you say, what are you feeling when you say this? How does this change your experience? If you take the first person and start using this language as I. Language is a way of alienating ourselves from ourselves. Language is a way of putting responsibility onto the other person. You have to use first person language. I know how it is, and then explore what that means. Substitute won't for can't. So this is helping the client take responsibility. I use this in music lessons all the time. The little child says, I can't do that. And I don't say won't, I say choose not to. That's actually, Pearls used the term choose not to. Choose not to means you have an active choice in whether or not you can do something. You might have to put a lot of work into it, but if eventually you can do something, saying I can't do something kind of shuts it down. What's the point? I have no role in this. In life, you do have a role in it. I choose not to play this scale perfectly. I choose not to have success in my workplace relationships. Because even if the scale is difficult, or if your workplace is difficult, there's a way of managing it, and you're choosing. So it's giving agency to the individual by changing the way they speak. It changes their relationship to the world. Substitute what and how for why. So Pearls famously said, why questions are for little children. You don't ask, why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? You say, how am I anxious? How am I depressed? What am I anxious? What am I depressed? Why is the blame game? Why? His fault, her fault, history's fault, the landlord's fault, the professor's fault. This is all displacing responsibility. When you look at how, you're describing and exploring the experience rather than looking to place the blame on someone outside of yourself. And no gossiping. Talk to people, not about people. And this is where empty chair really comes into play. Let's talk about the empty chair. So talk to people, not about people. Gossip. As soon as the person starts, the child says, and then my teacher said, and then my mom said, or then my dad said, you stop and you say, okay, you get out an empty chair. You put two chairs across from one another, facing one another. The child's in one chair, or the adult, and they put the parent in the other chair. And you say to the parent, don't talk about what they say directly to the parent. You always criticize me and never praise me for the things I do right. Now that's much different than the child saying, my mom always criticizes me. My mom always tells me I'm not doing what's right. This places an ownership on the individual, and when you're let me see if I can articulate this. When you are faced with saying it to the individual in an empty chair, you imagine that person's on the chair across. You're faced with a here and now moment, not something that is gossiped about or talked about in the past or what's going to happen later in today. It's about being present in the engagement. So Pearls would say what's important is not what you actually have in conversation with this person in real life, but your fantasy about that. What's in your mind about how that person would react, not how the person really would react in conversation. And that's why empty chair is so powerful. Empty chair, like I said, you take a chair and put it across from the chair that the client is sitting in, and the individual engages in fantasy in a direct conversation. Instead of saying, my mom does this or my dad does that, you say, what, Mom, you do this. And then you say to the client, what is your mom saying back to you? You can even have, and you listen, and the client becomes aware of their imagination of how the person's reacting. It brings them into great direct present contact. You say, what are you feeling right now when you say this? This is very powerful stuff. You can even have the client get up out of their chair and go into the other chair and take the position of the parent and talk back to the person. So change questions in the statements. Instead of the person, this is coming underdog, instead of saying, do you think I should? The person replaces, I should. Take responsibility. You can use these little passages. I feel blank, and I take blank % of the responsibility. And the aim of this is to develop an individual's volition, sense of agency in their situation, going from a sense of victimhood to a sense of active responsibility. That's the part of growing up. Sentence completion. I help hurt myself when. So sentence completion is very good exercises. These are more sentence completion ideas, things you can explore with the child. Okay, so this gets to the Violet Oaklander, Windows to Our Children. This is fantasy games, creating awareness. So the child fantasizes about being an animal or something in the environment, and then talks about what that experience is like. So, for example, in Buddhist psychology, there's something that's referred to as the totem animal, and this is coming to awareness of some animal that you relate to on a personal level. My totem animal, incidentally, is a jaguar or a puma. I relate very much to these large wildcats on an emotional level. I feel like a puma. What are the characteristics? Well, this is a very extremely powerful animal, an animal capable of incredible violence, incredible self-preservation, but also a very gentle, playful, and docile animal. And if you watch the puma in the wild, they enjoy their solitude. They're quiet. They like to rest. They like to sleep. They don't harm anyone or anything unless provoked. But if those things are provoked, they become vicious. The teeth, the claws come out. And I have always seen this as a core aspect of myself. I relate to, even in some ways, the domestic house cat. You see a cat, and the cat is pleasant, and you go up to the kitten. Anyone here who has a cat knows that the cat communicates with their tail. They don't say, I like, or I dislike, or watch out with their mouth. They say it with their tails. And the tail is flowing, and it's very nice while you're petting them, and then eventually the tails start to twitch. That's communication. It's saying, okay, I've had enough. Back off. No more brushing. No more petting. And if you ignore that twitch of the tail, swat! The claws come out, and you get a bloody hand or a bloody arm or a bite on the hand. Now that is something that I've always related to in my personal life. I am pleasant and enjoyable, and I give off hints of when it's time to back off. And if someone crosses poor boundaries with me, they get swatted or bitten, something like this. And so the puma has become, the cat, the wild cat has become my totem animal. So you can help a child to explore their totem animal. Fantasize that what would you be? What if you were an elephant? What if you were a cow? What if you were a cat? Now, could you imagine how powerful the story I just told about myself, my personal relationship to the puma? Can you imagine if you have an individual who has difficulty saying no? Most people in life have difficulty saying no. Now imagine that you ask that individual who's a people pleaser to imagine what they would be like if they were a puma. And maybe they even move and walk like a puma. This is an exercise they do in acting class. And talk to them as a puma. This is a fantasy game of getting to know and become aware of aspects of yourself, the dichotomies of the self. The wise person. You ask a child to fantasize that they were a wise old person, many years of experience and wisdom. What would they say to the younger child self? And maybe even do this in an empty chair. The wise person, it's tapping into aspects of ourselves that we ignore and neglect. And by tapping into them, we become aware, oh, there is wisdom within me. It's growing up. It's becoming self-sufficient. Dream work is a major part of counseling in Gestalt. I will put up a PDF of my piece of dream work method that I give to people who are interested in learning how to interpret their dreams. The therapist does not interpret the dreams in Gestalt method. The patient interprets their own dreams. They arrive at their own meaning. They do this by understanding that the entire dream represents aspects of themselves. Every part of the dream, every physical object, the setting, every figure in the dream, everything is representative of an aspect of themselves, and you go through the dream and you become, you engage with each aspect of the dream and have dialogue with it in the empty chair and hear what it has to say to you. Become aware of what you're feeling with different aspects of the dream, and this is a way towards integrating the self. This is a very great way. Gestalt dream work is very powerful. And finally, Gestalt play therapy. The idea of play therapy is, again, getting into the emotional kind of present moment, lost in the fantasy, through dancing, playing with dolls or playing with figures, playing with animals, sandbox play. Dialogues take place, and you are aware as a therapist that each one of those figurines or aspects of the child's fantasy story, ask them to write a story or tell a story. Every aspect is an aspect of themselves, just like the dream, and becoming aware of that aspect of the self. So what's experienced as something external, another person, is actually an internal part of themselves that's being projected onto that external person. And it also involves coming into contact with emotions and feelings that are taking place in the here and now. And the goal is to restore a child's natural functioning, self-regulation. I'd say not restoring, but cultivating self-regulation. People don't automatically know how to self-regulate. They have to learn how to self-regulate. Experience the contacting process leads to integration, change. The idea here is to remember that taking responsibility means becoming more aware of one's active volitional role in solving one's problems for themselves rather than expecting others to help them solve their problems. It's about taking the onus for everything in life and accepting the things that they can change, and becoming aware of the things they can change and accepting the things they cannot change as just being part of the human condition. So again, that is Fritz Perls and Gestalt Therapy for Children. I would say this book is a great resource. Windows to Our Children by Violet Oaklander.